Please, don't take the cloth off." The words tumbled from her lips like broken glass, jagged with fear. Jacob Holt froze in the doorway of his cabin, one hand still clutching the lantern, the other holding the ragged blanket he'd wrapped around her. The woman lay trembling on his floor, eyes wild, her whole body shaking as if the very air burned her skin. The storm outside howled across the Arizona hills, but it was the storm inside this room that made Jacob's chest tighten. He'd seen men die on battlefields, seen children starve in war camps, but nothing made his knees weaken like this stranger's plea. "Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled." The night Jacob found her was colder than usual. The desert had a way of biting when the sun dipped, and the wind sweeping through the mesquite trees carried a sharpness that gnawed at his bones. He had just returned from checking the fence line, his boots caked with dust, when he noticed the sound soft, desperate, and all wrong. It wasn't coyote nor the restless bray of cattle. It was a human voice, hoarse and broken, bleeding through the night like a secret no one was supposed to hear. He followed it, lantern swinging, shotgun slung loose in his hand. And then he saw her. She was stumbling barefoot along the tree line, a ragged strip of cloth clinging to her body, torn and dirt-stained. Her skin was etched with bruises and dried blood. She fell once, twice, before collapsing fully into the brush. By the time Jacob knelt beside her, the woman's breath was shallow, her lips cracked white. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice as rough as gravel. She flinched, tried to pull away, but had no strength. Jacob shrugged off his long coat, wrapping it around her shaking form. When he lifted her, she was light as a bundle of sticks. Too light. Back at the cabin, the fire sputtered low. Jacob laid her on the bearskin rug, setting the lantern close. She stirred eyelids, flickering open pupils wide like a hunted animal's. That was when she whispered those words, the first words he'd hear from her. "Please, don't take the cloth off." Jacob froze his hand, gripping the edge of the blanket he tried to pull higher across her shoulders. He saw the terror etched into her face. He thought of the countless men he'd fought alongside, the way their last pleas hung in the smoky air of war. But this was something rawer, closer. He let the cloth stay. "All right," he said softly. "All right." She blinked at him as if not believing his restraint. Slowly, her breathing eased into shallow, erratic rhythm. Jacob sat back on his heels, studying her. He'd been alone for so long since the war, since the fire that took the barn, and left only ghosts on the Holt ranch. Company wasn't something he looked for. Yet fate had dropped this stranger into his cabin on a night when the coyotes wailed like widows in the dark. The minutes stretched. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying grit and sand against the planks of the cabin. Inside, the woman dozed fitfully, her hand still gripping the cloth as if death itself might snatch it away. Jacob poured water from the jug, dipped a cloth, and dabbed it gently along her temple. Her skin burned with fever, but she didn't resist. A flicker of trust passed through that fevered gaze, quick as lightning. He leaned back in the rocking chair boots, heavy on the floorboards. For the first time in years, Jacob Holt felt the strange weight of responsibility for another soul. He should have ridden into town. He should have let the sheriff know. He should have done a dozen things other than sit there in the flickering lamplight, watching over a woman who begged him not to peel away the last shred of her protection. But Jacob stayed, and as the fire popped and the shadows played across the walls, he realized the night wasn't just about sheltering her. It was about what he might uncover if he dared. For beneath that filthy cloth lay a truth that made his hands tremble, a truth that would set in motion the bloodiest chapter of his quiet life. The morning came gray and thin, the kind of dawn where the desert sky seemed reluctant to bleed its colors. Jacob sat slouched in his chair, stiff from keeping watch all night. He hadn't closed his eyes once, too busy listening to the shallow rise and fall of her breathing, afraid that if he blinked, she'd vanish back into the night like a ghost. The woman stirred at last. Her eyes opened wide and unsteady, darting around the cabin walls as though she had woken inside a prison. When her gaze landed on him, she froze. Jacob raised his hands slowly, palms outward. "You're safe," he said. His voice was calm, low, like talking to a skittish colt. She tried to sit up, but the movement brought a groan to her lips. Her hand gripped at the ragged cloth knotted around her chest. Jacob's jaw tightened. He wanted to help, but he remembered the terror in her voice the night before. "I'll get you water," he muttered. He poured from the jug, slid the tin cup across the floorboards to her. She watched it scrape toward her hesitant, before finally lifting it with trembling fingers. She drank in tiny gulps, each one sounding like a victory. "What's your name?" Jacob asked after a moment. Her lips parted, then closed again. He could see the war in her eyes, whether to speak at all. Finally, she rasped Eliza. Jacob nodded. "Eliza, that's a good name." Her gaze flicked to the fire. Where am I? My ranch," he said simply. "Near Dry Creek, North Ridge." Eliza's shoulders sagged, but not with relief, more like dread. She stared at the door as if expecting it to burst open at any second. Jacob noticed, and a suspicion tightened in his chest. Whoever she was running from, they weren't far. He busied himself with the kettle, stoking the fire until it roared. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, sharp and grounding. He poured 2 mugs, setting one near her. She sniffed it warily. "It's hot," Jacob said. "Take it slow." Her lips touched the rim. She sipped, and for a moment, just a flicker, the hard lines of fear on her face softened. Jacob watched her without comment. When she set the mug down, she finally whispered, "You shouldn't have helped me." His brows furrowed. "Why's that?" "They'll come for me," she said, her voice breaking, "and for anyone near me." Jacob leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Who?" Her eyes met his. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, carried too much. Men who don't let go of what they think is theirs. The silence after her words pressed heavy against the log walls. Jacob's mind pulled him back to Tennessee battlefields, to men who thought the world was theirs to break. He'd sworn he'd left all that behind. But looking at Eliza, fragile, feverish, clutching at the filthy cloth, like it was her only skin, Jacob knew he'd already chosen. "I've got land," he said, voice steady. "Got fences. Got a shotgun by the door. Let 'em come." Eliza shook her head. "You don't understand. They won't stop. Not until I'm back in chains." The word chains hit Jacob like a hammer. He saw the faint lines etched on her wrists, scars that weren't from rope, but iron. Rage stirred in him, a familiar fire he thought the war had taken. He didn't press her further, not yet. He knew a wounded animal needed time before it trusted the hand that fed it. The rest of the day was slow, marked by silence and the creak of floorboards. Jacob split wood, the crack of the axe echoing through the valley. From the corner of his eye, he saw Eliza shuffle to the window, still wrapped in his coat, her silhouette trembling but upright. That evening, when the sun bled red across the ridge, Jacob lit the lantern. Eliza sat by the hearth, staring into the flames as if the fire itself might devour her memories. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to know what devils had carved those scars into her, what monsters hunted her still. But instead he said, "You'll be safe here tonight." She turned to him slowly, her lips trembling, and though no words came, a single tear tracked down her cheek, glistening in the firelight. Jacob looked away, throat tight. He'd promised safety before, once long ago to a girl in a burned-out farmhouse. He hadn't kept that promise then, but by God he would now. The night deepened, wind whistling through the canyon. Somewhere far off, hooves struck the earth, distant, faint, but enough to set Jacob's hand on the shotgun. Eliza heard it too. Her eyes snapped wide, body rigid. Jacob met her gaze. "Get some rest," he said, though his tone was iron, because he knew rest wouldn't come easy for either of them. The knock came long before dawn, sharp and deliberate against the cabin door. Jacob's eyes snapped open where he sat, slumped in the chair. The embers in the hearth still glowed faint orange, casting Eliza's face in a fragile light. She stirred at the sound, clutching the cloth tighter around her shoulders. Jacob motioned with a finger to his lips. Quiet. He rose slowly, shotgun in hand, and stepped toward the door. Whoever it was didn't knock again. They just waited, the silence outside heavier than the desert air. "Who's there?" Jacob called. His voice carried steel. A pause. Then a man's drawl. "Morning, friend. Name's Carter. I'm looking for someone. Woman about yay high. Dark hair. Might have wandered off the main road last night. You seen her?" Jacob's grip on the shotgun tightened. He glanced back at Eliza. Her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head violently, mouthing, "Don't." Jacob turned back to the door. "Ain't seen a soul," he said. Carter chuckled, a low, oily sound. "That's so funny, because we tracked prints leading this way. Bare feet in the dust. And you're the only cabin within 10 miles. The silence stretched again. Eliza's hand trembled on the blanket. Jacob could feel her fear vibrating in the air. Tracks might have been coyotes, Jacob said evenly, or strays from the reservation. The man outside didn't laugh this time. His tone sharpened. Open the door, friend. Jacob raised the shotgun, keeping it angled toward the sound of the voice. This is Holt land, he said. Nobody comes through without my say. You want to push, you best be ready for what you'll find. For a long moment, there was nothing but the whistle of wind through the cedar posts. Then Carter spat in the dirt. We'll be back, he muttered. Hoofbeats followed, fading into the distance. Jacob let out a slow breath. His shoulders sagged, though his fingers stayed taut on the trigger until the sound was gone. Eliza broke the silence first. You shouldn't have lied. He turned, meeting her eyes. You wanted me to tell them you were here? She looked down, her face twisted in pain. You don't know what they'll do if you stand in their way. Jacob set the shotgun against the wall. I know what men like that do if no one stands in their way. For a moment their eyes locked hers, full of dread, his burning with a quiet defiance. The rest of the morning Eliza barely moved from the hearth. Jacob worked outside fixing the corral fence, though his ears never strayed far from the sound of hooves. Every crow cawing in the canyon made him glance at the ridge. When he came back inside, he found her tracing the scars on her wrists absent-mindedly. He didn't mean to stare, but she caught him looking. Her hand snapped back under the blanket. Chains, Jacob said softly. You meant that literal. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then in a voice so faint he almost missed it, she whispered, They kept me locked for months, took me from town to town like cattle, said I was theirs to use theirs to break. Carter's the worst of them. Jacob's chest tightened. Memories of prisoners of war, men beaten, starved, branded, flooded back. He'd seen cruelty, but hearing it in Eliza's trembling voice made his jaw clench in a way that felt new. You're not theirs, he said firmly. Not anymore. She gave a bitter laugh, hollow as a grave. You think saying it makes it true? Jacob knelt in front of her, his weathered hands resting on his knees. I think men like Carter count on fear, but fear don't own you unless you let it. Her eyes glistened. Easy words, rancher, harder when you've lived in chains. He didn't argue. He only said, Then let me carry some of it. For the first time, her gaze softened. The cloth slipped just slightly at her shoulder, and Jacob glimpsed a patch of skin marred by burns raw. Cruel shapes seared into her flesh. His breath caught fury burning through him. But before he could speak, she yanked the cloth back into place, shivering. Don't, she whispered. Please don't look. Jacob swallowed hard, forcing his hands to remain still. All right, he said quietly. I won't. But his mind was already made up. Carter wasn't just a problem wandering the ridge, he was a storm coming for them both. And Jacob Holt had never run from a storm in his life. As the day waned, the wind shifted. The desert smelled of rain, rare and heavy. Jacob stood on the porch with his rifle, watching clouds gather over the horizon. Eliza sat inside her shadow, hunched in the lamplight, and both of them knew Carter would return. Not asking next time. Demanding. The storm rolled in fast that night, sweeping across the desert like a black curtain. Jacob had lived on the Dry Creek Ridge long enough to know when the sky meant business. Rain here didn't fall gentle, it came in torrents beating the land until it bled mud. By the time the thunder cracked, shaking the walls of the cabin, Eliza was curled tight near the fire, her knees to her chest. Each roll of thunder made her flinch like a gunshot. Jacob watched her uneasy. She wasn't afraid of storms, she was remembering something worse. You all right? He asked quietly, crouching near her. She shook her head. Sounds like them, she whispered. Jacob frowned. Sounds like who's? Her eyes flicked up to him hollow. The chains, the doors slamming shut, the boots on the floorboards when they came for me. Jacob's gut twisted. He put another log on the fire just to break the silence. The flames roared higher, painting the cabin in flickering gold. You're not there anymore, he said firmly. She hugged herself tighter. It doesn't feel like it. He wanted to argue, to insist she was safe here, but another thunderclap rattled the windows, and she cried out, covering her ears. That cry, it wasn't fear alone. It was despair, raw and sharp enough to cut. Jacob reached out, then stopped short, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Eliza, he said softer now. You ain't alone. Not tonight. Not while I'm here. Her breath hitched. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she lowered her hands from her ears. For the first time since she'd spoken her name, her eyes stayed on his. The storm howled outside, rain hammering the roof, but inside the firelight and the closeness between them built its own fragile calm. They sat in silence for a long while. Then, as if pulled from some deep cavern inside her, words began spilling from Eliza's lips. I was born in St. Louis, she murmured. My father had debts, big ones. When he couldn't pay, Carter took me. Said he was doing us a favor that I'd work it off. But it wasn't work he wanted. Jacob's jaw clenched. He said nothing, letting her voice fill the cracks the storm couldn't. They kept me in a room above the saloon. No windows, just wood and smoke. I thought I'd die there. Her fingers picked at the cloth, restless. One night Carter came with a brand, said if I tried to run again, he'd mark me so everyone would know I was his. Jacob shut his eyes briefly, a wave of fury crashing inside him. He pictured the scars he'd glimpsed before. Burns not accidents. Wounds carved by cruelty. Eliza's voice faltered, but she pushed on. I ran anyway. The night I found you, they were chasing me. I thought I'd never make it past the ridge. Her words broke, dissolving into sobs she fought to swallow. The sound tore through Jacob like shrapnel. He'd seen men cry in foxholes in hospitals with bullets still lodged in their bodies. This was different. This was the sound of a soul torn raw. Jacob's hand, rough and calloused, finally touched her shoulder. She stiffened at first, then slowly, achingly slowly leaned into it. He didn't speak. He just let her weight rest against him, her sobs shaking through both of them. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin something shifted. When her tears finally stilled, she pulled back, wiping her face with the edge of the cloth. You don't know what you've done, she whispered. Carter won't forgive this. He'll burn everything you own to ash. Jacob leaned back on his heels, meeting her gaze steady. Then he'll learn I don't scare easy. Her lips parted, a protest dying in her throat. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something fragile, like hope. But it vanished as quickly as it came when thunder roared again. Jacob stood moving to the door. He opened it a crack, rain slapping against his face. His eyes scanned the darkness. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the ridge. For a split second, he thought he saw a figure, horse and rider, silhouetted against the storm. Then darkness swallowed it whole. Jacob shut the door jaw hard. They're closer than you think, he muttered. Eliza stared at him, fear trembling in her voice. Then you should let me go. Before they kill you too. Jacob turned, rain dripping from his hat brim. His voice was iron. Not happening. The storm pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing, but Jacob Holt had weathered worse. And if Carter thought he could reclaim what he'd lost, he was about to learn that a Holt never surrendered what he chose to protect. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the land drenched and the air heavy with the scent of wet sage. Clouds dragged lazily across the pale sky, and the mud clung thick to Jacob's boots as he stepped outside. His breath fogged in the chill morning. He scanned the ridge, eyes narrowing at every broken shadow the rising sun threw across the land. Nothing moved, not yet. But he knew men like Carter. They didn't make threats in the dark to leave them idle come daylight. Inside, Eliza lingered near the hearth, her face pale, but her body restless. She hadn't slept. Jacob could see it in the hollow circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged. She held the cloth tighter around her as if it were armor, refusing to let it slip even when sweat beaded her brow from the fire. Jacob poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one near her. She stared at it, then lifted her gaze to him, uncertain. It ain't poisoned, he said dryly. Her lips almost twitched, but she didn't drink. You don't understand, she murmured. Try me. Her hands tightened around the cloth. If Carter sees me here wrapped up like this, he'll know you saw. He'll know you touched what he marked. Men have died for less. Jacob set his cup down hard, the sound echoing through the cabin. I fought men worse than Carter. Seen 'em strut and sneer until a bullet tore their pride clean through. He don't scare me. Eliza's eyes shimmered. He should. Silence pressed between them until the creak of saddle leather broke it. Jacob's head snapped toward the window. Out on the rise, 3 riders appeared, their horses kicking mud with each step. One of them, broad-shouldered, black hat low over his brow, Jacob recognized from the voice the night before. Carter. Jacob's blood went cold, though his face betrayed nothing. He reached for his rifle. "Stay here," he ordered. Eliza grabbed his sleeve, desperation sparking in her eyes. "No, please, don't go out there." He pulled free, firm but not cruel. "If I don't, they'll come in here. And I'd rather meet them under the sky than let them darken my doorway." Eliza's breath came quick, shallow. Her knuckles whitened around the cloth. But she didn't follow. Jacob stepped out onto the porch. The boards groaned under his weight, damp with the storm. The riders slowed, reining their horses just shy of the corral. Carter swung down with the casual confidence of a man who thought the land belonged to him. "Morning again," Holt Carter drawled, wiping rain from his hat brim. "Mighty storm we had. Was thinking maybe you had company to keep warm." Jacob rested the rifle in the crook of his arm. "Storm kept me busy enough patching leaks." Carter smirked. "Funny thing, though, tracks don't lie. And I got a nose for runaway trouble." His eyes cut toward the cabin door, sharp as a knife. "You sure you don't want to share what's inside?" Jacob's jaw flexed. "Only thing inside is a fire and my breakfast. You aiming to smell my bacon, too?" The other two men chuckled, but Carter's grin thinned. "I don't like liars." Jacob's rifle angled higher, deliberate. "Then we got a problem, 'cause I don't like thieves." For a moment, tension crackled hotter than any lightning storm. Then Carter's smirk returned, but his eyes stayed hard. "I'll tell you what, Holt. I'll give you until sundown. If she's here, you hand her over and we part like friends. If you don't," he spat into the mud, "we'll take her, and we'll take more than that." Jacob didn't move, didn't blink. "You got your answer already." Carter studied him for a long moment, then tipped his hat mockingly. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Sundown it is." The three of them turned, riding off, slow, deliberate, leaving deep prints in the wet earth. Jacob stood until they were specks on the horizon, then lowered the rifle with a steadying breath. Inside, Eliza had crept to the window. Her face was pale as milk lips trembling. When Jacob walked back in, she shook her head. "You just signed your death warrant," she whispered. Jacob shut the door behind him. "No, Eliza. I signed his." Her eyes filled, torn between terror and something else, something she couldn't name yet. The day stretched long after that. Jacob worked with grim purpose, checking ammunition, shoring up the corral, moving tools closer to the cabin. Eliza watched him through the haze of fear, clutching the cloth, as though, if she let go, the world would unravel. Every strike of Jacob's hammer, every quiet motion of his preparations told her one thing: he wasn't running. Not from Carter, not from anyone. But as the sun crawled westward and the shadows grew long, Eliza knew Carter was a man of his word. Sundown would come, and with it, hell. The sun slid lower, bleeding red light across the desert sky. Sundown loomed, and with it came a tension so thick Jacob could feel it in his bones. The ranch sat quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. This was the stillness before a strike, the air holding its breath. Inside, Eliza paced the floorboards, bare feet whispering against the wood. Her hands clutched the cloth so tightly, her knuckles gleamed white. She kept glancing at the window as though each shadow was about to crawl inside. Jacob set a lantern on the table and adjusted the wick. "If you're going to wear a path in my floor, least do it with boots on," he said, trying for humor. Her lips trembled, but no smile came. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I understand more than you think." He rested the lantern down with a soft clink. "I know a bully when I see one. Carter ain't the first I've dealt with, and he won't be the last." Her eyes snapped to him, shining with both fear and defiance. "Carter isn't just a bully. He owns men, owns sheriffs, judges. He pays them in gold whiskey women. You stand against him, you're not just standing against Carter. You're standing against everyone who bows to him." Jacob leaned on the table, the fire casting his features into sharp planes. "Then let him bow." "I don't." Her breath hitched, as if she wanted to argue, but the words stuck. Instead, she whispered, "Why?" He studied her for a long moment. "Because the way you look at that door like it's a noose waiting to tighten. I ain't stomaching that. Not in my home." For a moment, the walls of fear around her cracked. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned away ashamed. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. faint at first, then multiplying, rolling across the land like drums of war. Eliza froze. He came early. Jacob's hand was already on the rifle. No, he came right on time. They both moved toward the window. In the dying light, the ridge glittered with steel and horse sweat. Carter rode at the head of 6 men now, each armed, each hungry for blood. Eliza's voice broke. There's too many. Jacob cut her off. Get to the back room. Stay down. I can't. You can, and you will. His tone snapped sharper than he meant, but it worked. She backed away, fear strangling her into silence. Jacob stepped out onto the porch as the riders slowed to a halt. The last rays of sun painted the sky crimson behind them, turning the scene into something hell itself might admire. Carter dismounted, boots squelching in the mud. His smile was as cold as the steel glinting in his hand. Sundown Holt. I'm a man of my word. Where is she? Jacob leveled the rifle, steady as stone. Not yours to take. The other men shifted uneasily, hands on gun belts. Carter chuckled, low, dangerous. You'd throw your life away for a woman you don't even know. Jacob's grip tightened. Better that than throw it away serving a man like you. Carter's smirk faltered. He spat into the dirt, then snapped his fingers. 2 men advanced, rifles raised. Inside, Eliza could see through a crack in the shutters. Her heart hammered so loud she swore the men would hear. She pressed her lips against the cloth, whispering prayers she hadn't dared utter in years. Outside, Jacob fired. The crack split the night, and one of Carter's men fell hard into the mud. The other scrambled, chaos igniting in an instant. Gunfire erupted, flashing bursts against the twilight. Jacob moved with the precision of a man who'd seen too many battles. Each shot measured, each step deliberate. He took cover behind a porch post as bullets thudded into the wood. Eliza bit her knuckles to keep from crying out. Every sound, the whistle of bullets, the thud of bodies, the curse of dying men ripped her nerves raw. Carter stood back, barking orders, his face twisted with rage. Burn him out! Burn it all! 2 men broke for the barn torches, flaring in their hands. Jacob cursed under his breath. He fired again, catching one in the leg, sending him sprawling. But the other made it to the barn flame, licking dry wood in seconds. Smoke curled into the sky. Horses screamed. Eliza covered her mouth as tears blurred her vision. Jacob, coughing on the first drift of smoke, ducked back into the cabin. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood soaking through. Eliza ran to him, instinct overriding fear. You're hurt, she gasped. Not dead, he said through gritted teeth. He grabbed her wrist. Eliza, listen. If this place goes up, we run for the creek. Understand? She nodded, trembling, though every part of her screamed she'd never make it past Carter's men alive. The fire roared, louder smoke pressing into the cabin. Outside, Carter's laughter carried through the chaos, mocking and merciless. Eliza clutched the cloth, whispering, Please, God, not again. Jacob reloaded, his hand steady despite the blood running down his arm. His eyes burned not from the smoke, but from something deeper, a resolve carved into the marrow of his bones. If Carter wanted a war, Jacob Holt was ready to finish it, even if it cost him everything. Flames licked higher into the night sky, orange light bleeding across the pasture. The barn crackled and roared, the heat pulsing against the cabin walls. Jacob slammed the shutters closed, coughing through the smoke seeping in. Back room now, he barked at Eliza. She hesitated, torn between obedience and the gnawing need not to leave him alone. But one look at his face, set like stone eyes, hard as tempered steel, sent her running. She ducked into the back, clutching the cloth as if it were her only anchor to sanity. Jacob crouched, low rifle ready. Carter's men circled closer, shadows darting in the firelight. The smoke, thick and oily, masked their exact movements, but sharpened their voices. He's holed up. Burn him out, one shouted. Cover the back door, another replied. Jacob exhaled slowly, steadying his nerves. He'd seen worse trenches filled with smoke, men screaming as they burned alive. He knew panic killed quicker than bullets. He cracked the door open, aimed and squeezed. Another rider pitched sideways off his horse. Gunfire answered bullets, tearing splinters from the doorframe. Inside the back room, Eliza pressed her ear against the wall. Her whole body trembled at each shot. Memories clawed at her, the last time she'd been cornered, the last time Carter's men had come with fire and fists. Her sister hadn't survived that night. She bit her lip until it bled, fighting back a sob. Not again, she whispered. Jacob ducked as glass shattered. A lantern smashed through the window oil, spraying across the floorboards. Fire erupted, devouring the wood with greedy speed. Damn it, Jacob cursed, stomping at the flames, but they spread too fast. Heat seared his skin, the cabin turning into a furnace. He burst into the back room. Eliza looked up, her face pale and eyes wide. We're trapped. Not yet. He grabbed her hand. The creek. Stay close. Don't stop. They burst out the rear door into the cool night air. Gunfire followed immediately. Bullets tore the earth around their feet as they sprinted through the dark smoke, chasing them like a living beast. Eliza stumbled, but Jacob hauled her upright, his grip iron. Run, he barked. The creek shimmered faintly ahead, moonlight catching the water. But shadows moved fast along the ridge, Carter's men cutting them off. Jacob skidded to a halt, pulling Eliza behind a boulder. The gunfire paused as Carter's voice rang out. You can't run, Holt. Hand her over and I'll let you walk away. Eliza's chest heaved, her fingernails digging into Jacob's sleeve. He won't let you live. I know, Jacob murmured. He peeked over the rock eyes, narrowing as he counted. 4 left. Carter hung back confident, letting others bleed first. Jacob's voice dropped low and firm. You trust me. Eliza's throat worked. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream that she trusted no one. But the truth clawed past her fear. Yes. His jaw tightened. He nodded once, decisive. Then, keep down. Jacob broke cover, rifle roaring. One man went down, another ducked for cover. Gunfire raked across the rocks as Jacob dove back beside her, breath harsh. Eliza's pulse thundered. She hated herself for it, but she prayed for his aim, prayed for the stranger who'd stood between her and the nightmare she thought would never end. The last 2 rushed them. Jacob's revolver barked, sparks flashing in the night. One dropped screaming. The other slammed into Jacob, knocking the gun aside. They crashed to the dirt, fists flying. Jacob grunted as the man's blade slashed across his arm. He twisted, muscles straining until the knife turned back into the man's chest. The body slumped dead weight. Eliza crawled forward, reaching trembling hands toward Jacob. You're bleeding. Later he rasped, yanking free. He staggered upright just as Carter's slow clap echoed across the creek bed. Well done, Carter drawled, stepping into the moonlight. His smile gleamed wolf-like. Didn't think you had it in you, Holt. But now it's just you and me. Jacob lifted his revolver, sweat and blood running down his face. His hands were steady, but his chest heaved. Carter shook his head, grinning. Go on, then. Shoot me. But I reckon you want to know what she's hiding under that cloth first. His eyes flicked toward Eliza, cruel and mocking. Ain't that right, darling? Eliza froze, the color draining from her cheeks. The cloth in her hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Jacob's brow furrowed. For the first time since sundown, his gun wavered. Carter's laugh was low and venomous. You don't even know what you're fighting for, do you? The fire from the burning cabin cast a devil's glow over Carter's face as he stepped closer, and Eliza knew there would be no running, no hiding. Not anymore. The air stank of smoke and sweat, the creek's cool mist doing little to drown the choking burn from the fire behind them. Jacob's revolver stayed trained on Carter, but the unease in his eyes betrayed him. He hated hesitation. Hesitation got men killed, yet the venom in Carter's words had carved a sliver of doubt where there'd been none before. Eliza's knees buckled. She gripped the cloth tighter, her breath ragged. The firelight flickered over her pale face, drawing every scar of fear she'd ever carried into harsh relief. She whispered more to herself than to anyone else. Please, don't. Carter's grin widened, slow and merciless. See? She don't want you to know. Ask yourself why Holt. Why would a woman beg to stay hidden? Maybe she ain't the innocent thing you think. Jacob's finger rested against the trigger, but his mind churned. He hated being played, and Carter was a master at it. Whatever you're hiding, Jacob said lowly. Never breaking eye contact with Carter. It doesn't change the fact he's a monster. Eliza flinched, torn between relief and dread. Jacob, Carter barked a laugh, mean and sharp. You protect her, but you don't know her. That's the joke. You'd shake if you saw the truth under that cloth. Just like I did. His voice dropped to a growl. That's why I want her back. Jacob's chest tightened. He didn't believe in fear, not for himself, but hearing Carter admit to it chilled him. A man like Carter only feared what he couldn't control. "You think she belongs to you?" Jacob spat. "She don't belong to anyone." Carter's eyes narrowed. "She'll come crawling back. They always do." The words sliced through Eliza like a blade. Memories surged nights when Carter's shadow filled the doorway, when he whispered lies about her being worthless without him. She had believed him once. She almost believed him still. But Jacob's voice broke through rough and steady. "Not this one." The revolver roared. Carter's hat flew as the bullet grazed his temple, tearing flesh but missing bone. He stumbled, cursing, then ducked into the shadows by the creek. Jacob fired again, but Carter was gone, the night swallowing him whole. The silence after was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the burning ranch and Eliza's sharp, shallow breaths. She pressed her back against the boulder, clutching the cloth like it alone kept her from unraveling. Jacob holstered the revolver with deliberate calm, though his chest still heaved. He turned to her, voice quieter. "You all right?" Her eyes glistened. "No," she admitted, her voice breaking. He crouched, trying to catch her gaze. "You're safe. For now." Her hands trembled violently. "You don't understand. He'll never stop. Jacob's calloused hand brushed her shoulder, firm, but not rough. "Then neither will I." Something inside her cracked at those words. A sob tore free, raw and aching. She collapsed against him, the cloth slipping slightly. Jacob stiffened as moonlight revealed a glimpse beneath the faint shimmer of scar tissue running across her collarbone, brutal and jagged. His throat tightened. He looked away quickly, giving her the dignity Carter had long denied her. "Doesn't matter," he murmured. "Doesn't change who you are." But Eliza pulled back, eyes fierce through her tears. "You don't know who I am." "Then tell me," Jacob said, his tone like a challenge. For a heartbeat, she almost did. The words clawed at her tongue, but then the image of Carter's sneer returned, and she shrank back, shaking her head. "Not yet. Please." Jacob exhaled, frustration and patience battling within him. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Not yet." They stayed crouched in the shadows until the fire from the cabin began to die down, leaving only blackened beams and the hiss of cooling embers. The air reeked of smoke, death, and loss. Jacob finally rose, offering his hand. "We can't stay here. Carter will come back with more men." Eliza hesitated before sliding her hand into his. His palm was warm, steady grounding. They made their way along the creek moonlight, guiding their steps. Each rustle of brush made Eliza flinch, each distant howl twisting her stomach. She felt like a hunted animal dragged along only by Jacob's unyielding pace. After what felt like hours, they reached a small thicket where the creek bent sharply. Jacob led her inside, where the underbrush was thick enough to hide them. He collapsed onto the ground, breath heavy. Blood soaked his sleeve, the wound deeper than he had admitted. Eliza gasped, kneeling beside him. "You're losing too much blood." "Had worse," Jacob muttered, though his skin was pale. She pressed the cloth against his arm, her fingers steadying. For the first time since the fight began, she let the cloth slip completely aside. The firelight no longer hid her scars, long, vicious marks etched down her neck and shoulder, reminders of nights stolen by cruelty. Jacob's eyes flicked to them, then back to her face. No flinch, no gasp, just quiet acceptance. Her chest ached. "You're shaking." "Not from that," he said hoarsely, meeting her gaze. "From thinking what kind of hell you've lived through." Her breath caught. For once, she saw no judgment in a man's eyes, only sorrow and something dangerously close to compassion. But before either could speak further, a branch snapped nearby. Both froze. Jacob's hand went to his revolver, Eliza clutching the cloth again. The night was not done with them yet. The snap of the branch cut through the night like a gunshot. Jacob tensed, revolver half drawn, his wounded arm trembling but steady enough to kill if he had to. Eliza pressed her back against the brush. The cloth clutched once more to her chest, as if she could fold herself into it and vanish. A second sound followed, the low crunch of boots in grass. Not rushed, not clumsy. Someone moved with intent. Jacob shifted, crouching lower, whispering so close she could feel the rasp of his breath. "Stay down. Don't move unless I say." Her fingers dug into the dirt, nails breaking as she fought the urge to bolt. The steps drew closer, then stilled. Silence blanketed the creek bend, except for the water rushing softly over stones. Jacob's muscles ached from the stillness, but he didn't dare move. Then came a voice, calm, older, not Carter's. "Jacob Holt. That you?" Jacob blinked, his grip tightening on the gun. The voice was familiar, but it carried a wary edge. He straightened slightly, still aiming toward the shadows. "Depends who's asking." From the brush stepped a tall, lean figure with a white beard and eyes sharp despite age. Marshal Ephraim Boone. Eliza's breath caught fear spiking anew. Lawmen were no saviors in her world. They had looked away when Carter's men came, looked away when the women begged. Jacob lowered the revolver only an inch. "Boone, you got a death wish sneaking through like that." The marshal lifted his lantern, its glow revealing his lined face. "Could ask the same. Your ranch is ash, and half the valley heard the gunfire. Carter's gone mad." Jacob spat into the dirt. "Carter's been mad." Boone's eyes flicked toward Eliza, who shrank under his gaze. "And who's this?" Eliza stiffened. "Nobody." Jacob cut in firmly. "She's with me." The marshal studied Jacob for a long moment. "With you, huh? Then you better explain before sunrise, 'cause Carter's telling every saloon you kidnapped his wife." The word hit like a hammer. Wife. Eliza's head dropped, shame searing her cheeks. She hugged the cloth tighter, wishing the ground would open and swallow her. Jacob's jaw clenched. "He's lying." Boone raised a brow. "Is he?" His gaze landed squarely on Eliza. Ma'am Eliza's lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat burned with the words she couldn't force out. Jacob stepped forward, his voice cold. "She owes Carter nothing, not anymore." The marshal's lantern swung between them, the light catching Eliza's scars. Boone's eyes softened, though his voice remained grave. "You're in deeper than you know, Holt. Carter's rich, mean, and got half the deputies in his pocket. He'll say you stole his property, and the law'll nod along." Jacob's knuckles whitened around the revolver. "She ain't property." The marshal sighed, rubbing his temple. "Tell that to the judge when Carter drags you both in front of him. Unless—" His tone lowered. "Unless you've got proof." Eliza shuddered, memories flooding papers Carter forged, marks he left to silence her witnesses, who turned away. Proof. Proof was ashes. Her silence answered for her. Jacob's shoulders squared. "Then we make our own proof." Boone studied him hard, then gave a slow nod. "You're stubborn as ever, but stubborn don't beat men like Carter." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "If you mean to keep her safe, Holt, you'll need allies. Men not afraid to bleed for truth. Do you have any left?" Jacob's eyes darkened. "A few." Boone handed him a small slip of paper. "Then ride east at dawn. Old mill outside Calvary Creek. I'll meet you there, but don't bring Carter's shadow with you." With that, the marshal melted back into the night, leaving only the echo of his warning. Eliza's body sagged, the tension in her frame trembling into exhaustion. She turned to Jacob, voice hoarse. "He called me Carter's wife." Jacob holstered his revolver, his tone grim but steady. "You're not. Not anymore. You hear me?" Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "Then why does it feel like I still am?" Jacob couldn't answer. He wanted to tell her freedom was hers already, but the truth was, Carter's shadow hung heavier than iron chains. He set his hand gently on hers. "Because he taught you lies. But I'll walk you out of them. One step at a time." The words sank into her like fragile hope, something she hadn't dared hold in years. As dawn edged gray over the creek, Jacob knew Carter wasn't finished. Men like him never quit until they were broken. And to break Carter, Jacob would have to risk everything, land, blood, and maybe even the fragile trust Eliza had just given him. The dawn came thin and gray, the kind that carried no warmth, only the slow reveal of a wounded land. Smoke still drifted from Jacob's ranch in the distance, curling against the pale sky like a curse. The air reeked of ash, and with each gust Eliza flinched as if expecting Carter's men to come storming back through the trees. Jacob watched her as she huddled near the creek cloth, clutched close, her face drawn but her spine rigid. She had not slept, though her eyes were heavy. Neither had he. His arm throbbed beneath the bandage she'd wrapped tight, blood seeping through despite her care. At last he rose and stamped out the meager fire they'd lit for warmth. "We move now," he said. His voice was low, steady, leaving no room for argument. Eliza hesitated, staring east where the marshal had told them to go. To Calvary Creek, Jacob nodded. Boone's no fool. If he says meet him, we meet him. He may be the only man in this valley who ain't bought by Carter. Her lips pressed tight. What if he changes his mind? Then we'll find another way. Jacob answered simply. His eyes were flint unyielding. But we don't stop moving. They set out along the narrow game trail, Jacob leading, Eliza following close. The forest was alive with the cries of waking birds, but every sound felt too sharp, too watchful. She clutched the cloth tighter, her skin crawling under the memory of Carter's voice. They always come back. Hours passed in silence, broken only by Jacob's occasional grunt of pain as his wound protested. Eliza wanted to tell him to stop to rest, but she bit the words back. She knew he wouldn't, and some part of her feared that if they slowed, Carter would find them before they drew breath again. By mid-morning, the trail opened into a clearing. Ahead, the skeletal remains of an old mill rose from the grass, its timbers gray with rot, the water wheel long stilled. Weeds choked the path, but faint tracks showed others had come through recently. Jacob raised his hand, signaling Eliza to halt. He crouched low, scanning the ground. Hoofprints. 3, maybe 4 riders had been here not long ago. His jaw tightened. Stay here, he whispered, drawing his revolver. Her heart hammered. No. He glanced back sharply, but before he could argue, the creak of wood echoed from the mill. A figure stepped into the light, Marshal Boone lantern in hand despite the daylight. You made it, Boone said, voice even. His eyes flicked to Jacob's bandaged arm. Looks like you nearly didn't. Jacob lowered his gun slightly, but didn't holster it. We weren't alone last night. The marshal's gaze shifted to Eliza, lingering with quiet weight. Then you know time's running short. Carter's already calling for your head Holt. Says you burned your own ranch and stole his woman. She's not his. Jacob snapped the edge in his tone, cutting like steel. Boone held up a calming hand. I didn't say she was. But the law don't care what's true, it cares what's written, and Carter has the papers. Eliza's stomach twisted. Papers. The marshal nodded grimly. Marriage license contracts. Forged or forced don't matter. On paper you belong to him. The word struck her harder than a fist. Belong. It dragged her back to nights when Carter's ring bruised her skin when he'd waved documents she never signed, claiming her as though she were cattle. Jacob stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. You're saying the law's blind. I'm saying the law's bought, Boone corrected. Unless we get proof to tear Carter's lies apart, you'll both swing. Jacob's hand curled into a fist. Then tell me how. The marshal studied him for a long moment before speaking. Carter keeps records. He's meticulous, every lie, every bribe, every debt. If we can find those ledgers, we bury him with his own hand. Eliza's breath caught. He kept them in a chest. At the ranch, her voice trembled as memory pressed in. He locked it beneath the floorboards. Boone's eyes narrowed. If it's still there, it's the only chance we have. But going back means walking into fire. Jacob straightened jaw hard. Then that's what we'll do. Eliza's hand shot out, clutching his sleeve. No. You don't know him. He'll be waiting. Jacob met her eyes steady and unflinching. I ain't afraid of waiting men. I'm afraid of letting you live another day under his shadow. The words silenced her, the cloth trembling in her grasp. For the first time, she wondered if Jacob's fight wasn't just for her, but for himself, a man who'd lost too much already and refused to lose more. Boone stepped closer, lowering his voice. You've got till nightfall to decide. Carter's calling for a posse at dawn. If you run, he'll hunt you. If you fight, you better end it. Jacob nodded once, resolute. Eliza turned away, eyes stinging. The old mill loomed around them, its timbers groaning in the wind. She felt trapped between past and future, neither offering peace. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. If we go back, and if you find what you're looking for, then I'll show you everything. No more hiding. Jacob's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she didn't owe him that, but part of him knew her truth was the key to both their survival. The decision lay before them, heavy as the ashes drifting from the horizon. The decision weighed on them all day, pressing down heavier than the heat. By late afternoon, Jacob and Eliza were sitting in the shadow of the ruined mill while Boone leaned against a splintered post, chewing on an unlit cigar. The air carried the scent of char from the west smoke from Jacob's destroyed ranch, still drifting even after a day had passed. Jacob broke the silence first. "We ride tonight." Boone exhaled, tossing the cigar into the dirt. "Didn't expect you to say anything else." Eliza's head jerked up. Her eyes searched Jacob's face as if she could find mercy written there, something that would spare them from what he had just declared. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Carter's men, they don't just kill, they make you wish you were dead first." Jacob's gaze held hers steady, unyielding. "I understand more than you think, and I'm not letting him write the end of your story." Her breath shook. "And if you're wrong, if he kills you, then what am I?" His hand reached for hers, rough but gentle. "Then you're still free." Boone shifted uncomfortably, his voice cutting in. "Romantic notions don't mean a thing if Carter's got 20 rifles aimed at you. You'll need a plan." Jacob gave him a cold look. "You think I don't know that?" The marshal straightened. "I think you're a man with nothing left to lose. That makes you dangerous and reckless." Jacob's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but Boone wasn't wrong. Still reckless or not, the path was clear. "We wait until the moon's high," Jacob said finally. "Less light in the valley. We'll go in quiet." Eliza shook her head violently. "You can't just walk into his den. He'll smell you before you cross the porch." "Then you tell me where the chest is." Jacob pressed his voice lower, more urgent. She looked down, clutching the cloth against her heart. "Under the floor by the fireplace. There's a loose plank, but—" "Jacob, he doesn't just guard it. She broke off, shuddering. "What?" Her eyes glistened with something between fear and shame. "He keeps the key on a chain, around his neck. He never takes it off." The words struck like iron. Boone muttered a curse. "So the only way to get the ledgers is to strip Carter himself." Jacob's face hardened, and for the first time Eliza saw in him something she had never seen before, something colder than fury. "Then that's what I'll do." Her stomach turned. "Jacob, you can't. You don't know." He silenced her with a look not of anger but of grim resolve. "I don't need to know. I just need to end it." Boone studied him for a long beat, then shook his head. "You'll die." Jacob adjusted the revolver at his hip. "Maybe. But if I don't try, she dies in every way that matters. That ain't a life worth guarding." The marshal cursed under his breath, then finally relented. "Fine. I'll cover you from the tree line. But if you're caught, don't expect me to drag your corpse out." Jacob smirked humorlessly. "Wouldn't want you to." The sun dipped lower, bleeding red across the horizon, staining the world in the color of fire. Eliza watched them both, her heart twisting until she could hardly breathe. They were men talking of war, but for her, this was not war, it was survival. When the last light drained from the sky, they saddled the horses. Jacob helped Eliza mount his wounded arm, straining, but he didn't flinch. His eyes never left hers. "Stay close. Don't speak. And if something happens, you run east. Don't stop." Her throat closed. "I won't leave you." His jaw flexed. "You will, if I say so." The moon was a sliver above the trees as they rode west, the ashes of Jacob's ranch drawing them back like a dark beacon. The trail was silent except for the creak of saddle leather and the pounding of Eliza's heart. As the burned husks of Jacob's ranch came into view, she felt her breath falter. The house stood blackened, half-collapsed smoke still curling from the ruins. But Carter's men were there, shadows moving against the glow of lanterns, rifles glinting. Boone slipped into the darkness of the pines, rifle ready. Jacob dismounted and crouched low, scanning the guards. Eliza slid off her horse, trembling. Jacob leaned close, whispering, "Stay low. Don't move till I say." Her hand clutched the cloth, her lips trembling against words she dared not speak. The night swallowed them as Jacob crept closer to the ruins, the weight of his revolver heavy, his heart pounding in time with the danger ahead. Behind him, Eliza knelt in the grass, praying without words. For in the ashes of his home, the final game with Carter was about to begin. The night pressed close around them, every sound sharpened by the tension thrumming through the air. Jacob crouched behind a half-fallen fence post, scanning the ruined ranch. The moon was no more than a sliver, casting just enough silver to paint the edges of Carter's men. Lanterns swung from hooks hammered into charred beams, their glow cutting shallow pools of light into the blackness. There were 4 guards Jacob could see. 2 on the porch, rifles across their laps, another pacing the yard with a lantern in one hand, shotgun in the other. The last man leaned against the barn's collapsed wall, chewing tobacco and spitting into the dirt, his eyes lazy but his fingers near his pistol. Boone's silhouette was a shadow in the trees behind his rifle, glinting once in the lantern light before fading back into black. The marshal would wait watch, but he would not interfere unless blood was drawn. Jacob knew it. He turned his head slightly and caught sight of Eliza crouched low behind a clump of brush, clutching that cloth against her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her heart from shattering. He motioned with 2 fingers. "Stay down." She nodded, though her eyes begged him not to leave her there in the dark. Jacob's jaw clenched. He pushed forward. Each step was slow, deliberate. He skirted the shadow of the porch, his breath shallow, his arm throbbing beneath its blood-stained bandage. The wood creaked above as one of Carter's men shifted in his chair. Jacob froze, hand hovering over his revolver until the sound settled. Then he moved again. The loose plank by the fireplace, Eliza had told him. If the chest was still there, if Carter hadn't moved it after the fire, it was his only chance. But first came Carter himself. That chain, that key. He pressed to the side of the blackened doorway, listening. Inside, faint laughter, men's voices cruel and unhurried. And over it all, Carter's drawl. "She'll come back," Carter was saying. "They always do. The cloth keeps them bound. She can run to the hills or the church or the devil himself, but she'll crawl back to me when the night gets cold enough." Jacob's fingers dug into the charred wood. His chest tightened, rage and disgust warring in him. He risked a glance inside. Carter sat in a broken-back chair near the gutted hearth boots up on a crate. The fire had scorched the walls black, but left just enough structure to stand. Around his thick neck gleamed a silver chain. The key glinted when he leaned forward to pour whiskey into a tin cup. 3 more men sprawled in the room, rifles leaned against the wall. Jacob's mind raced. 1 man against 4 in close quarters suicide. Unless. He backed into the shadows and signaled toward Boone. 1 hand flat palm, then clenched fist. Boone gave the faintest nod in return. He understood. Jacob inhaled once deep and steady. Then he stepped through the doorway. The first guard didn't see him until the butt of Jacob's revolver smashed across his jaw. The man crumpled, and the room erupted. Hell, one of them shouted, scrambling for his rifle. Jacob fired 1-2 shots. Both men dropped, one clutching his chest, the other collapsing with blood spraying the wall. Carter surged to his feet, overturning the crate. His eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. "You." Jacob leveled his revolver. "Me." Before Carter could reach for his pistol, Boone's rifle cracked from outside. The last guard pitched forward dead before he hit the floor. Now it was just the 2 of them. Jacob's chest heaved, the smoke and sweat stinging his eyes. Carter grinned, wicked and slow, like a wolf scenting blood. "You think you can take what's mine?" "You don't own her," Jacob snarled. "Not with paper, not with chains, not with fear." Carter laughed deep and ugly. His hand shot to his holster. But Jacob was faster. He fired once. Carter staggered back, clutching his shoulder, the silver chain swinging loose. Eliza's cry cut the night. She had run to the doorway, her face pale in the lantern glow. Jacob Carter's eyes flicked to her. His grin widened through the pain. "There you are, girl!" Rage boiled in Jacob. He lunged forward, tearing the chain from Carter's neck. Carter howled, swinging wildly, but Jacob shoved him back against the hearth. The key cut into Jacob's palm as he gripped it tight. "It ends now," Jacob hissed. Carter's snarl faltered, and for the first time there was something else in his eyes. Not fury, not arrogance, fear. The sound of Boone's boots came from behind. "Jacob, don't kill him yet. We need that chest." Jacob's hand trembled, gun still aimed between Carter's eyes. Every part of him wanted to pull the trigger to finish it, but Eliza's gaze held him wide and pleading. Not for Carter, for Jacob. To stop before he became the thing he hated. Slowly, Jacob lowered the gun. "Get the chest," Boone said. "Let the papers damn him." Jacob's breath came ragged. He knelt, pressed the key into Eliza's hand. "Show me." Her fingers shook as she clutched it, the metal icy even against her burning skin. She stepped to the hearth, knelt, and pried at the floorboard with trembling hands. It gave way. Beneath lay a small iron-bound chest, scorched at the edges but intact. She dragged it out, heart pounding. The weight of years of lies, of chains, everything Carter had built sat before them. Boone's eyes glittered. "Open it." Jacob's hand closed over Eliza's, steadying her. Together they slid the key into the lock. The chest clicked, and the truth inside waited to be revealed. The chest creaked open, the iron hinges groaning like a dying animal. Dust and smoke spilled upward, and Eliza flinched as if she half expected a curse to rise with it. Inside, bundled ledgers filled the space books bound in cracked leather, some pages charred at the edges, but most intact. Beneath them, wrapped in oilskin, lay envelopes, contracts, and sealed documents bearing the county's stamp. Boone leaned close, lantern light spilling across the writing. His lips curled into something halfway between satisfaction and disgust. "Well, I'll be damned. Land deeds, loan papers, names." He thumbed one open. Every bribe he ever paid, every family he bound to him. Carter's whole empire sits right here. Eliza's breath came quick, shallow. Her fingers hovered over the papers but didn't dare touch. "That's what he used," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He'd make a man sign, then hold it over him. He owned them all. And me." Jacob set a hand on her shoulder, steadying her trembling. "Not anymore." Carter groaned from where he slumped against the hearth, his shoulder bleeding freely. His sneer was weaker now, but his words were venom. "You think those papers mean anything?" "The judge drinks my whiskey. The sheriff wears my coin. Burn 'em if you want, it won't change a thing." Boone's eyes narrowed, his rifle steady at his hip. "Don't be so sure. Law might be crooked, but the people ain't blind. This kind of truth has a way of spreading." Jacob lifted one of the ledgers, its weight heavy in his hands. He flipped it open and scanned quickly. Names filled the pages, ranchers, farmers, even churchmen, beside numbers that spelled debt, ruin, ownership. Each entry was a chain, and Carter had forged every link. Jacob slammed it shut. "This is enough to choke him with his own rope." Eliza stared at Carter, tears shining in her eyes. "Why," she whispered. "Why me? You could have broken any man in this valley, but why did you take me?" Carter's gaze slid to her, dark and mocking even through pain. "Because you were strong. Stronger than the rest. Breaking them was easy. Breaking you." That was sport. The words cut deeper than any knife. Eliza recoiled, hand covering her mouth. Jacob surged forward, fist tightening on his revolver, but Boone barked sharply. "Jacob." Jacob froze, every muscle quivering with the urge to end it. Boone's voice stayed hard. "Not like this. Don't let him drag you down into his pit. He's already finished. He just doesn't know it yet." Jacob forced himself back, chest-heaving eyes locked on Carter like a wolf denied its kill. Boone shoved the lantern closer to the chest. "We need to move. His men will be back from their rounds soon, and I'd rather not be caught celebrating." Eliza wiped her face and gathered the papers, tucking them back into the chest. Her hand steadied as she worked, determination hardening inside her. "Jacob," she whispered, "we can use this. If people see the truth, they won't follow him anymore. They'll turn." He nodded grimly. "Then we'll take it east. To the judge who ain't bought. There's still one." Carter barked a bitter laugh, blood flecking his lips. "You think you'll make it out with that chest? My men will hunt you through every canyon, every town. You'll be dead before sunup." Eliza turned on him, her voice sharp as steel for the first time. "Then let them come. I've spent years running from you. Tonight, I stop." For a moment, even Carter seemed taken aback. Jacob looked at her with something close to awe. The fear that had haunted her for years burned away, leaving behind a woman fierce enough to stand her ground. Jacob hauled Carter upright by the collar, his face inches from his. "You listen good. You won't touch her again. You won't touch anyone. Your power ends here." He shoved him back into the chair where Carter slumped pale and weak. Boone snapped the chest shut, looping a strap through the iron handles. "We ride now." They moved fast, slipping into the night. Jacob carried the chest with Boone's help, Eliza walking close behind. Every shadow seemed a threat, every sound a warning. Yet the air felt different, lighter, though danger still coiled around them. At the horses, Jacob secured the chest behind his saddle. Eliza mounted, clutching the reins with white knuckles. Boone swung up onto his own horse rifle across his lap. Jacob paused, casting one last look at the smoldering ruins of his ranch. This was where his life had been burned to ash. But tonight, something had survived, something worth fighting for. He turned his horse east. We ride. The night swallowed them whole as they thundered into the dark, the chest rattling behind Carter's empire, crumbling with each hoofbeat. Yet Jacob knew the man's words weren't idle. Carter's men would come, and the valley would not stay silent when the truth came to light. The chase had only just begun. The horses thundered eastward, hooves striking sparks from the hardpan trail. The night wrapped around them like a cloak, moonlight flickering across the chest strapped behind Jacob's saddle. Each jolt made the iron clasps rattle, as if the papers inside were alive, demanding to be read, demanding to be freed. Eliza clung to her reins, her hair whipping loose in the wind. For years she had ridden only under Carter's watch. Every step controlled, every path decided for her. Now she rode fast and free, yet every beat of her heart carried the weight of what lay behind them, the broken man who still held sway over too many. Jacob pushed his horse harder, his injured arm a steady throb, but he didn't slow. Beside him, Boone rode silent, his eyes never leaving the darkness that flanked them. The marshal's jaw was set tight. He knew, as Jacob did, that Carter's men were coming. It started with a sound distant, then nearer. Hooves. More than a few. Boone cursed under his breath. They're riding hard. We've got minutes, maybe. Jacob scanned the land. To the south stretched open prairie, a death trap under moonlight. To the north, jagged hills rose like teeth, their shadows deep enough to swallow men whole. He jerked his chin toward the hills. We cut through there, lose 'em in the rocks. Boone frowned. Steep country, hard on the horses. Better than dying in the open, Jacob shot back. Eliza's voice broke in high and tight. Do you hear them? They're closer. Jacob leaned over, steadying her reins with his good hand. Stay with me. No matter what happens, don't stop. She nodded. Though her face was pale, her lips bloodless. They veered north, plunging into the shadows of the hills. The trail narrowed to a twisting cut. Rocks crunching beneath hooves, branches clawing at their arms. Behind them, the pounding of hooves grew louder, shouts echoing off the stone walls. Faster, Boone barked. They urged their mounts onward, weaving through the dark canyon. The chest bounced wildly, the straps straining. Jacob threw a glance back. Shadows swarmed the canyon's mouth, torches, flaring rifles catching moonlight. Carter's men had come in force. Bullets cracked stone chips, exploding around them. Eliza screamed, ducking low. Jacob's revolver was in his hand in an instant. He fired back blindly, sparks flaring against the canyon walls. Keep riding, Boone shouted. He wheeled his horse rifle, already in position. He fired one shot, then another. A rider pitched sideways, torch dropping into the dust. The canyon filled with smoke and echoes. Go, Boone roared. I'll cover. Jacob jerked his reins hard. No, we stay together. Boone's voice was like iron. You got the chest. You got her, that's what matters. Now ride, damn you. The words struck like a hammer. Jacob's gut twisted. He knew Boone was right, yet leaving the man felt like betrayal. Eliza cried out. A bullet whined past her ear, splintering rock. Jacob made the choice. He spurred his horse forward, dragging her with him, the chest slamming against the saddle as they plunged deeper into the canyon. Behind them, Boone's shots echoed, steady measured. The marshal's silhouette held the line as long as it could, a single man against a swarm. The canyon twisted again, and suddenly they were alone, the shouts muffled by stone. Jacob slowed, chest-heaving, listening. Only silence broken by the ringing in his ears. Eliza's hands shook violently on the reins. Jacob, Boone. We'll see him again, Jacob said, though his throat was tight. He's tougher than he looks. They pressed on, climbing higher into the hills. At last they reached a plateau, the land opening wide under the stars. From up here, the valley stretched below like a black ocean. Far to the west, faint torches flickered Carter's men spreading hunting. Jacob dismounted, yanking the chest down. His hands trembled with exhaustion, blood seeping through his bandages. He dropped to his knees, setting the chest on the stone. Eliza slid down beside him. Her face glowed pale in the starlight, her eyes still wide with fear, but lit with something else, now resolve. She pressed her hands over his, steadying them. You saved me, she whispered. Jacob shook his head. Not yet. Not until this reaches the right hands. Until his hold is broken. She looked out across the dark valley where shadows moved like wolves in the grass. Then we keep going, no matter what it takes. Jacob studied her, this woman who had been broken and yet still stood fierce and unyielding now. A knot tightened in his chest, not fear this time, but something deeper, something worth bleeding for. Below, a faint echo of gunfire cracked through the night. Boone was still fighting. Jacob stood, drawing a deep breath. He pulled Eliza up beside him, the chest between them. The chase wasn't over. It had only grown sharper, but for the first time Jacob felt something stronger than rage coursing through him. Hope. The plateau stretched ahead, a sea of stone and scrub glowing faintly in the moonlight. Wind hissed over the rocks, carrying with it the far-off rumble of hooves. Jacob knew it wouldn't be long before Carter's men fanned through the hills and flushed them out. He tightened the straps around the chest once more, every knot tugged hard with his teeth when his bandaged arm refused to cooperate. Eliza knelt beside him, her face set, her hand steadying his. "You can't carry all of this alone," she said softly. "Let me help." Jacob looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the frightened woman he'd found trembling in Carter's grasp, but someone changed, hardened by fire. He nodded once and gave her the reins of his horse. "Stay close. If they come on us, you ride east and don't look back." Her jaw clenched. "Don't ask me to leave you. Don't make me bury you." He shot back, his voice rougher than he meant. The words hung heavy between them, but she didn't argue again. She climbed into the saddle, waiting for his signal. Jacob mounted his own horse, the chest secured behind. They started forward across the plateau, hooves clattering against stone. Below, the valley shimmered with torchlight as riders split and scattered. The hunt was on. Then came the sound, one sharp report of a rifle rolling across the night. Jacob's head snapped toward the west. Another shot followed, then another. He knew that rhythm. Boone was still alive. Eliza's eyes widened. "He's holding them off." Jacob swallowed hard. "Buying us time." But the sound was fading, swallowed by distance, and in its place rose the closer thunder of hooves pounding fast from the north. Jacob's blood chilled. They weren't alone on this plateau. Down he barked. Bullets whined past, sparking against stone. Shadows burst from the scrub Carter's riders, cutting them off. Torches flared, rifles gleamed. Jacob fired first, his revolver bucking in his hand. A rider screamed and toppled. The plateau exploded into chaos, horses crashing, guns blazing, shouts echoing like thunder. Eliza clung to the saddle, ducking low, the reins slipping through her fingers. A rider lunged for her rope, swinging. Jacob spurred forward, ramming his horse into the man's side. Both beasts collided hard, and the rider went down screaming beneath hooves. "Stay with me," Jacob roared, but more came circling, cutting off their escape. Jacob's revolver clicked empty. He drew his knife teeth bared, ready for the worst. Then a rifle cracked from the dark ridge above. One of Carter's men pitched backward, torch tumbling. Another shot split the night, dropping another rider. Jacob jerked his head up. A figure stood outlined against the stars, rifle braced. "Boone." The marshal's voice rang out across the plateau. "Keep moving, you stubborn fool." Jacob's heart slammed in his chest. Relief surged. Boone had survived. He wheeled his horse, charging through the gap, Boone's shots carved open. Eliza rode hard at his side, hair flying, eyes blazing. They burst free, pounding east, the chest rattling wildly. Behind them, Boone's gun kept barking, covering their retreat, until distance swallowed the sound. They didn't slow until the plateau dipped into another canyon, shadows closing around them. The horses steamed, lathered, and spent. Jacob slid down, chest-heaving, blood soaking fresh through his bandages. Eliza dismounted too, her hand shaking, her face streaked with dust and sweat. She reached for him, clutching his arm. "Jacob, you're hurt." He forced a grim smile. "I'll live. Long enough to finish this." They dragged the chest into a cleft of rock, hiding it from sight. Jacob sank against the stone, his breath ragged. Eliza knelt close, pressing her scarf against his wound. "You should have left me back there," he muttered. She looked at him fiercely. "Don't you dare say that. You saved me. You saved more than me. That chest, what's inside it, could save this whole valley." Her words struck deep. For years, Jacob had lived only to endure, to grit his teeth through the fire. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight of purpose. He reached for her hand, rough against her smooth skin. We'll see this through, together. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. In the silence that followed, the night stretched wide stars burning like 1,000 watchful eyes. Somewhere beyond, Carter's men regrouped. The chase wasn't over. But Jacob no longer rode only for vengeance. He rode for her, for Boone, for every soul trapped in Carter's chains. And for the first time, he believed they might actually win. Dawn bled across the canyon walls, painting the stone in shades of rust and fire. Jacob stirred where he sat, slumped against the rock, the chest at his side like a sentinel. Every muscle screamed, every wound ached, but he was alive. Eliza was there too, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, her hand still clasped over his. The sound of wings broke the stillness, a hawk circling overhead, its cry sharp and lonely. Jacob's gaze followed it, then shifted eastward. Far in the distance, past the broken ridges and open prairie, lay the town. Sanctuary, perhaps, or another battlefield. Eliza stirred, blinking against the light. Her voice was raw with exhaustion. "Is it morning?" "Yeah." Jacob's throat was dry. "Means we made it through the night." But the memory of Boone's rifle echoing over the plateau clung to him. The marshal had bought them their escape, but Jacob didn't know if the man still breathed. That doubt gnawed at him worse than his wounds. They broke camp quickly, horses restless beneath their hands. The animals were worn thin, their flanks slick with sweat and blood from the ride. But there was no time for rest. Carter's men would not stop. As they mounted up, Eliza's eyes caught his. "When we get to town—" "What?" Then Jacob tightened the reins. "Then we put this chest in the right hands. And if Carter follows us there—" His jaw clenched. "We finish it." The ride east was merciless. The sun climbed higher, burning away the cool shadows. Dust rose behind them, dry and choking. Every mile stretched longer than the last, the land rolling out endless. By noon, Jacob's vision swam. He gritted his teeth, fighting the haze. Eliza noticed. She slowed her horse to ride closer, hand brushing his arm. "You can't keep this pace, Jacob. You're bleeding through your bandages." He forced a grin, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've bled before." Her voice sharpened. "And you'll bleed out if you don't let me help." The fierceness in her tone stopped him cold. She wasn't begging anymore, wasn't pleading like the night he found her. She was demanding, and he realized with a surge of pride that she had found her strength. They stopped briefly under the sparse shade of a mesquite. Eliza tore strips from her skirt, binding his wound with care, her hand steady even when his body flinched. "You should have been a nurse," he muttered. She gave him a look, half exasperation, half warmth. "I've spent years patching myself up. You learn quick when no one else will." Jacob's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to tell her she wasn't alone anymore, but the words tangled in his throat. Before he could find them, the sound of hooves drifted over the horizon. Not theirs. Jacob's hand went to his revolver. Eliza stiffened, scanning the ridge. And then a rider appeared, silhouetted against the sun. Broad-shouldered, battered rifle slung across his back. Boone. Relief hit Jacob so hard he nearly swayed from the saddle. Boone. The marshal rode down slow, his horse limping, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp alive. "You two don't listen worth a damn," he rasped. Eliza gasped, her face breaking into a smile. "You're alive." "Barely." Boone slid from his saddle, staggering. Jacob caught him, steadying him with his good arm. "You bought us time," Jacob said quietly. Boone's mouth twitched. "Figured it was worth sticking around to see if you'd waste it." Despite the weariness, Jacob laughed, a short, harsh sound, but real. They regrouped quickly. Boone's horse was near spent, so they shifted the chest to Jacob's mount, dividing the weight. Boone insisted on riding still, though every movement was pained. By late afternoon, the outline of the town shimmered on the horizon, heat waves dancing above rooftops and church steeple. Relief surged until Jacob spotted the line of riders on the ridge behind. Dust plumes rose like storm clouds. Carter's men were closing. Boone squinted. He brought near everyone. Eliza's hands tightened on her reins. "If they reach the town first, they won't." Jacob cut in his voice, low, dangerous. "We get there. We end this." The three of them pushed their horses into a desperate gallop. The town grew larger, clearer, streets, porches, faces turning at the thunder of hooves. But so did the sound behind them. Shouts, gunfire, the raw hunger of men who hunted not just for a chest, but for blood. Jacob's jaw set. His wounds burned his body, screamed, but his heart pounded with something fiercer than fear. He wasn't just running anymore. He was charging straight into the storm. And for the first time, he wanted Carter to be waiting. They hit the edge of town at a dead run, hooves sparking against hard-packed clay dust, swallowing their wake. Noon heat pressed down like a hand, turning the main street into a white glare of sun and grit. Jacob felt his horse shudder beneath him, bones and muscles stretched to breaking, but he didn't slow. The chest thumped the cantle with every stride, the iron corners biting into leather like a promise, "Get me there." Boone pointed with his chin toward the squat brick building at the end of the street, the courthouse 2 steps and a bell out front. "Straight through," he rasped. "No detours." Faces turned. Storekeepers froze in doorways. The piano in the saloon stumbled to silence. A child dropped a hoop and stared as 3 riders tore past the water trough. Jacob saw it all in slivers, the seamstress with pins in her lips. The farrier's hammer paused mid-swing, the bartender partway through polishing a glass. Then he was hauling the reins, sliding sideways, boot hitting the dirt as he grabbed the chest. Inside, Boone barked, stumbling from his saddle gray with dust, but eyes hard. Now. They shouldered through the courthouse doors into cooler air, smelling of ink and old wood. A clerk stood up so fast his chair toppled. Marshal what? In Boone didn't slow. Judge Reeves in on the bench. Calendar's light, but he, good, Boone snapped. Ring the bell. The clerk blinked, then lurched for the rope. The bell outside told its iron voice, shaking the street. Doors swung, boots thudded. Inside the courtroom, Judge Alastair Reeves, a narrow man with a jaw like a hatchet and tired, intelligent eyes, peered over his spectacles. "Marshal Boone, you don't generally make appointments like this." Boone swept his hat off, sweat crawling down his temple. "Beggin' the court's indulgence, Your Honor, but we've brought something that won't keep." He jerked his head at Jacob. "Put it up." Jacob slammed the chest onto the prosecution's table. The sound rang like a shot. Eliza stood beside him, clutching her cloth shoulders square despite the tremor in her hands. People poured in, shopkeepers, cowboys, mothers with babies at the hip, curious men in dusters with their hands a little too close to their belts. Whispers snaked down the benches. Holt, Boone, Carter. Judge Reeves rapped his gavel once. "This court will have order." His gaze settled on the chest, then on Eliza, then on Boone. "Explain." Boone's voice carried without shouting. "Evidence, Your Honor. Ledgers con Trombox forged licenses. Taken from a man claiming ownership over folks like their fence posts. We're asking the court to take custody, examine it, and call it what it is, criminal." A murmur swelled. The judge lifted a hand, the sound died. He motioned to the clerk. "Mr. Denton, secure the contents." Jacob fit the key to the lock. The chest opened with that same graveyard groan. The clerk's hands shook as he lifted ledgers, oilskin-wrapped envelopes, papers stamped with county seals. Reeves leaned forward, scanning a random page, then another. His mouth thinned. "Names," he said quietly. "Debt schedules. Payments to deputies." His eyes flicked up suddenly sharper. "Marshal, do you realize what you've dragged into my courtroom?" "Better here than buried," Boone said. From outside, the dull thunder of hooves answered. The bell's last vibrations shivered the panes. Then a shout went up in the street. Jacob's stomach dropped. He didn't need to look to know. Carter had come. The courthouse doors blew inward. Dust billowed. Sunlight slashed across the benches. Carter strode in with a dozen riders spilling after their hats, low guns easy in their hands. He wore a clean coat and a ring that flashed when he pointed, and even with blood crusted at his collarbone where Jacob's bullet had kissed him, his smile was pure brass. "Your Honor," Carter purred, "I come to report a theft. That man, a lazy flick toward Jacob, stole my property and endangered this town." Jacob took one step forward. "Your property." His voice rode the word like a whip. Carter's gaze slid to Eliza, then lingered there. "My wife." Gasps rippled the room. Eliza's fingers convulsed around the cloth. Judge Reeves's gavel cracked down. This is a court, not a theater. Marshal Boone, disarm these men or I'll clear the gallery. Boone's badge caught the light as he turned. Guns on the floor, gents. He wasn't alone. 2 town deputies had slipped inside with the crowd. They weren't Boone's men, but they watched him. Not Carter. That was new. Carter's smile cooled. He lifted his hands, not high, not submissive, and his riders took a half step back instead of forward. It was a calculation, not obedience. Your Honor, he said silk smooth, I have papers. He produced a folded document from his breast pocket like a magician palming a dove. Marriage license, signed, sealed, forged, Eliza said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried, or signed when I had a knife to my ribs. Silence braided the room tight. Reeves extended a hand. Bring it here. Carter hesitated a fraction too long, then smirked and sent a rider to deliver it. Reeves read, then set the paper down like it stank. He tapped the ledger open beside it, eyes moving faster now. Marshal Mr. Holt. Miss. He looked to Eliza. She swallowed. Eliza Ward. Miss Ward, Reeves said, if you allege coercion, this court will hear you. He glanced at the swelling crowd. But understand once spoken words can't be unsaid. Eliza's breath hitched. Jacob felt it beside him like a tug on a rope tied to his chest. He wanted to step in front of her to be wall and roof and shield, but he forced himself still. The person who needed to speak wasn't him. Carter's eyes glittered. Careful, darling. Truth cuts both ways. She turned to face the room. The light through the high windows caught the fine dust in the air and set it drifting around her like ash. When she spoke, the tremor in her voice was not weakness. It was the echo of something that had finally stopped running. He took me, she said, out of St. Louis. Said my father's debts were mine to pay. Said I'd pay with my work, then with my body. When I tried to run, he marked me so anyone who saw would know. Her hand gripped the cloth. I asked a good man not to take this away because shame lives in the skin before it lives on paper. She didn't look at Jacob. She didn't need to. Carter scoffed. Stories. The law requires documents, Boone's voice cut in. Then let's read. He tapped the ledger. Judge page 42, entry on one Cao Ming blacksmith. Debt-inflated tools taken daughter indentured. Or here page 61, bribe to Deputy Fenwick for lost complaints. And there he flipped, found a line, stabbed it with a finger. Payment to a justice of the peace 2 counties over, cash for license. Same date as this marriage. Reeves's jaw hardened. Color rose along his throat. He looked up at Carter with something new in his eyes. Not caution, not polite judicial distance. Contempt. Mr. Carter, you bring forged evidence into my court. You accuse a marshal of theft and you march armed men into a hearing. Are you trying to be hanged today, or is it mere arrogance? Carter's smile snapped. Careful, Judge. He shifted, letting his coat fall just enough to show the butt of his pistol. There's more of us than you. Before the room could tilt, Eliza moved. She stepped forward, hands shaking, and unclasped the cloth at her collarbone. Don't, Jacob said the word out before he could catch it. She met his eyes. For once, she was the one telling him to be still. I'm done hiding. The cloth fell away from one shoulder. Gasps struck like thrown stones, not at nakedness, but at what the light revealed scar tissue raised and ragged letters burned into flesh by a hand that enjoyed the work. Reeves went pale. The clerk looked away. A mother gathered her child close without thinking, then forced herself to stop as if ashamed to flinch from another woman's pain. Eliza's voice didn't waver. I begged him not to take it off because I thought this made me unclean. He wanted me to think that. Men like him always do. She turned just enough for the room to read what had been written into her. A name. Not hers. He branded me so no one would listen when I said no. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then from the back, an older rancher in a sweat-stained hat said softly, My boy's name is in that ledger. Another voice. Mine too. A third. He took my sister's deed. The murmur swelled, a tide turning. Carter felt it. He bared his teeth. Enough! His hand dropped for his pistol. Boone's rifle came up like a thunderclap. Don't. Jacob moved without thinking, placing himself between Eliza and the guns. He saw in a single cut of time every angle Carter's finger tightening. Reeves, rising gavel, useless now. The deputies unsure but leaning toward Boone. the crowd's fear curdling into something hotter. Carter fired. The shot shattered a window glass, raining bright. Jacob's revolver answered the crack, smashing the room's trance. Men shouted. Women ducked. One of Carter's riders drew and fell in the same motion Boone's shot, taking him center chest. Deputies Reeves' roared voice like a whip. Swear in every able man now. The clerk fumbled a drawer, yanked free a tarnished tin star. Then another. Hands rose, ranchers, shopkeepers, the farrier with his hammer still tucked in his belt. Tin flashed in the judge's grip. Oaths were shouted more than spoken. The room shifted from audience to posse in 3 breaths. Eliza didn't run. She stood behind Jacob, cloth bunched in one fist, shoulder bare and blazing under the high windows, and she did not bow her head. Carter backed toward the doors, gun hot in his hand, calculating fast. He'd come expecting fear. He found a court. He found a town. He found a woman who wouldn't crawl. For the first time since Jacob had met him, real uncertainty flickered across his face. He snarled, jerked his chin. Out! His men began to retreat, firing wild to clear a path. Splinters jumped from pews. A lamp shattered flame, licking up a velvet curtain. Fire, someone cried. Bucket Line Reeves bellowed, already moving. Boone Holt. Hold the door. Jacob planted a boot against a fallen bench and braced. Boone slid beside him, face blood-streaked and steady. The deputies flanked. The door became a choke point, just wide enough for one man at a time to try his luck. Carter's gamble had flipped. Jacob, Eliza said softly. He glanced back just once. Her chin lifted. Don't let him leave this town with my name. He nodded a vow more than a gesture. I won't. Outside the street boiled with heat and dust. Inside the courthouse became a fort. Buckets flew hand to hand, tin stars flashed. Ledger pages fluttered in the draft like trapped birds, then settled heavy with ink and truth. Carter holstered, then changed his mind, then did the thing bullies do when the crowd stops bowing. He ran. Jacob pushed off the bench, Boone with him, both men exploding through the doors into the hard light. The street yawned wide, the world loud and bright after the courthouse gloom. Carter vaulted the steps, boots skidding on grit, his bay horse dancing sideways at the noise. He hooked a foot in the stirrup and swung. Carter Jacob roared. The man looked back, one heartbeat, one look. There was no swagger in it now, only hate and a fear deep enough to be honest. Finish it, Boone said low. Jacob stepped off the last riser into the street sun in his eyes. Blood in his sleeve, the town gathered behind him like a wind at his back. He raised his revolver, and the gun in Carter's hand jerked up, desperate and ugly. The final reckoning waited in that split breath between triggers. The street held its breath. Dust shimmered in the noon light, caught in the still air like suspended ash. Jacob's revolver aimed, steady finger curled against the trigger. Carter perched on his bay horse, dragged his pistol skyward with a sneer twisted across his face. For one eternal second, everything narrowed to 2 men staring across 30 feet of dirt. No crowd, no courthouse, no sun. Just vengeance and fear. Carter's gun flashed. The shot went wide, splintering the sign above the general store. Jacob didn't flinch. His own revolver bucked in his hand, the crack ringing down the length of Main Street. Carter jolted back in the saddle. His pistol tumbled from his fingers, clattering into the dust. The bay reared screaming hooves, carving the air. Carter clung for half a heartbeat, then slipped. He hit the ground hard, coat twisting around him. The crowd surged, but didn't move closer. The town seemed to know this moment belonged to Jacob and Boone. Carter rolled, gasping, one hand pressed against the dark stain blooming across his chest. Boone advanced slowly, rifle leveled. Don't, he warned as Carter's trembling fingers reached for the dirt where his gun had fallen. Carter coughed, crimson flecking his lips. You think this ends with me? His eyes darted to the chest, still visible inside the courthouse doorway, where papers spilled like entrails. Names in there, men with more power than you can dream. You kill me, you'll hang. You drag me in, you'll both drown with me. Jacob holstered his revolver, the decision quiet but final. Maybe. But you don't own her anymore. Carter's gaze flicked to Eliza. She had stepped onto the courthouse steps, her cloth still clutched in one fist, her scar bared to the sun. She didn't flinch under his eyes. For the first time, Carter looked small, diminished not by blood loss, but by the weight of a truth he couldn't bury anymore. He spat into the dust a bitter stain. "You'll never outrun it," he rasped. Boone's boot connected, sending Carter onto his back. The marshal knelt, slapped irons on him, and hauled him half upright. "Outrun it." "We're done running." The townsfolk pressed closer. Now men, women, children, faces marked with both fear and something new, resolve. The farrier stepped forward, spat into the dirt beside Carter. "That ledger's got my brother's name." Another voice. "And mine." The swell grew, names overlapping until Carter's scorn drowned beneath the roll of voices refusing silence. Judge Reeves appeared at the courthouse door, papers in hand, his voice hard as iron. "By the authority vested in me, this man stands arrested for fraud, coercion, and unlawful bondage. He will stand trial." Applause broke ragged, not joyous but fierce, like men and women clapping back at fear itself. Boone shoved Carter toward the steps, deputies catching hold to drag him inside for holding. His threats trailed behind him, thin and fraying. "You'll all burn. You'll all pay." Then the doors slammed shut. Jacob turned breath, harsh sweat stinging his eyes. Eliza descended the steps slowly, each stride deliberate, as if testing the ground beneath her feet for the first time in years. When she reached him, she lifted the cloth again, hesitated, then dropped it into the dust. "No more hiding," she whispered. He caught her hand. The scars on her shoulder were raw, brutal, but in the blazing sun they looked less like chains and more like marks of survival. The crowd parted around them, not pitying, not gawking, but giving space. Boone, leaning on his rifle, managed a half smile. "You two best get some rest. There'll be testimony to give come morning." Jacob squeezed Eliza's hand. "We'll be here." She tilted her face up to him, eyes shining not with tears, but with the strange brightness of a life no longer borrowed. "I thought I'd be running forever." "Not anymore," he said. "Not while I've got breath in me." A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. The townsfolk weren't looking at Carter anymore. They were looking at one another. Shoulders straighter, spines stiffened. A ledger of sins had been dragged into daylight, and with it came the unshakable truth. They weren't alone. By nightfall, the fire in the courthouse curtain was long doused, the chest locked under court seal, and Carter chained in a cell that smelled of rust and justice. The town settled, but something had shifted, an axis tipped. On the edge of town, Jacob and Eliza stood by the corral horses grazing nearby, the horizon washed in red-gold light. The prairie wind tangled in her hair. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, then out across the land. "Forward. Together. We build something he can't touch." Eliza closed her eyes, breathed deep, and let the air fill her lungs like freedom. For the first time since St. Louis, she wasn't waiting for footsteps behind her. She was choosing where to stand. Jacob slid his arm around her shoulders, feeling the strength, their scar and all. "You're free, Eliza. And I'm not letting go." Above them, the last light sank into the wide western sky. Tomorrow, the fight would continue, papers to sign, trials to face, ghosts still to confront. But tonight, for one sacred moment, there was quiet. The kind of quiet only earned after truth is spoken, chains are broken, and a woman finally stands in her own name. And in that silence, the rancher and the scarred woman, no longer captor and captive, no longer runaway and pursuer, took their first step into something new, not fear, not survival, but a life of their choosing. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.